Officer James Miller stood before the hushed courtroom, his pressed blue uniform and gleaming badge projecting an image of authority and trustworthiness. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his face as he raised his right hand to take the oath. At age 42, with 15 years on the force, Miller had testified in dozens of cases, but this one felt different. The case seemed straightforward. A routine traffic stop on Cedar Avenue at 11:30 p.m. on a quiet Tuesday night. Marcus Thompson, a 45-year-old high school science teacher, had allegedly run a red light. What happened next would change many lives forever. Please state your name and position for the record, requested District Attorney William Parker, a tall man with grained temples and wire-rimmed glasses. Officer James Miller, badge number 4872, Metro Police Department, Narcotics Division. Miller replied confidently, his voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. From her seat at the defense table, Sarah Chen watched Miller intently. As Thompson's court-appointed attorney, she had reviewed the case files repeatedly. Something about Miller's original report had bothered her, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Thompson sat beside her, his normally neat appearance now worn down by 3 months in county jail. His dark skin had taken on an ashen tone, and his shoulders slumped under the weight of accusations that could cost him his career and freedom. Miller began recounting the events of that night with practiced ease. I observed the suspect's vehicle, a 2018 silver Toyota Camry, proceed through the intersection of Cedar and 5th despite the red light. I initiated my lights and siren, and the vehicle pulled over approximately 100 yards later. The officer described approaching Thompson's car, noting that the driver appeared nervous and was sweating despite the cool evening. When I asked for his license and registration, his hands were shaking. Based on my training and experience, this indicated possible criminal activity. In the gallery, Thompson's 19-year-old daughter Lisa watched with clenched fists. Her father, who had never even had a parking ticket, now faced serious drug charges. She knew in her heart something was wrong with this picture. Miller continued his testimony, explaining how he had asked Thompson to step out of the vehicle. During the pat-down, which the suspect consented to, I felt what appeared to be a small plastic bag in his jacket pocket. Upon retrieval, I discovered approximately 50 grams of cocaine packaged for sale. Thompson shook his head slightly, maintaining the composure he'd learned from years of handling unruly teenagers in his classroom. He had told his attorney repeatedly that he had never consented to a search, and there had been no drugs in his possession. Upon searching the vehicle, Miller went on, I discovered an additional 200 grams of cocaine hidden under the driver's seat, along with small plastic bags and a digital scale, items consistent with drug distribution. The district attorney nodded approvingly as Miller described finding the evidence. And did you follow proper procedure in collecting and documenting this evidence, Officer Miller? Yes, sir. Everything was photographed in place before collection, logged appropriately, and submitted to evidence following standard chain of custody protocols. From her position at the defense table, Chen noticed something odd about Miller's demeanor. While his words were confident, his left hand kept touching his collar, a subtle tell she had learned to recognize from years of courtroom experience. He was uncomfortable about something. Judge Patricia Martinez, a veteran of the bench known for her sharp mind and no-nonsense approach, took notes throughout the testimony. She had worked with Officer Miller on numerous cases over the years and had always found him to be professional and credible. The testimony continued as Miller described the arrest process, explaining how Thompson had remained silent after being read his rights. In my professional opinion, Miller concluded, the evidence clearly indicated Mr. Thompson was engaged in the sale and distribution of illegal narcotics. What Officer Miller didn't know was that his carefully constructed narrative was about to unravel. In her bag, Chen had evidence that would shake the foundations of not just this case, but the entire department. As she prepared for cross-examination, she could feel the weight of the convenience store security footage on her laptop, its timestamp telling a very different story than the one Miller had just presented under oath. The courtroom remained quiet, the air heavy with tension. For now, Miller appeared to be the picture of law enforcement integrity, his testimony damaging and seemingly irrefutable. But soon, very soon, the truth would emerge in ways that no one in that courtroom could possibly anticipate. Sarah Chen sat late into the night in her cramped office, surrounded by stacks of case files and empty coffee cups. The wall clock showed 11:45 p.m., but she barely noticed the time. Her eyes were fixed on her laptop screen, playing the grainy security footage from the stop and go convenience store for the 20th time. Something wasn't adding up. According to Officer Miller's testimony, he had pulled Thompson over at 11:30 p.m. on Cedar Avenue. But the security footage from the store, located at the same intersection, showed Thompson's silver Camry passing through at 11:47 p.m. More importantly, the traffic light was clearly green. "This is impossible," Chen muttered, rubbing her tired eyes. She picked up Miller's police report again, comparing timestamps. Either the officer had lied under oath, or something even more sinister was at play. The next morning, Chen arrived at the courthouse early. She had barely slept, but adrenaline kept her alert. As she set up her laptop at the defense table, Marcus Thompson was brought in wearing his orange jumpsuit. The past 3 months in jail had taken their toll on the once energetic teacher. "Ms. Chen," Thompson whispered, leaning forward. "How's Lisa doing? She looked so upset yesterday." Before Chen could answer, Officer Miller strode into the courtroom, looking fresh and confident. He nodded to the district attorney and took his seat near the front. Chen noticed he wasn't wearing the same nervous expression he had shown during parts of his testimony the day before. Judge Martinez called the court to order. "Ms. Chen, you may begin your cross-examination of Officer Miller." Chen approached the witness stand slowly, carrying her laptop. "Officer Miller, yesterday you testified that you pulled over Mr. Thompson at 11:30 p.m. on Tuesday, March 15th. Is that correct?" "Yes, that's correct," Miller replied firmly. "And you're certain about that time?" "Absolutely. I noted it in my report immediately." Chen nodded, opening her laptop. "Your Honor, I'd like to present Defense Exhibit A, security footage from the stop and go convenience store located at Cedar and 5th. The district attorney jumped to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This evidence wasn't shared during discovery." "Your Honor." Chen responded calmly, "This footage was only obtained yesterday evening. The store owner just found it when checking their backup systems." Judge Martinez peered over her glasses. "I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Ms. Chen." The laptop was connected to the courtroom's display system. The footage began playing, showing the intersection where Thompson was allegedly stopped. The timestamp clearly showed 11:47 p.m. "Officer Miller," Chen continued, "can you explain how Mr. Thompson's car appears at this intersection 17 minutes after you allegedly pulled him over?" Miller's face tightened. "The store's clock must be wrong. I spoke with the store owner this morning. Their system is synchronized to the atomic clock network for their financial transactions. It's accurate to the second." The courtroom grew tense. In the gallery, Lisa Thompson leaned forward, her heart pounding. She pulled out her phone and began taking notes, her journalism training kicking in. "Perhaps I made a mistake in recording the time," Miller offered, his confidence wavering slightly. Chen pulled out another document. "This is your dispatcher's log from that night. It shows no record of any traffic stop on Cedar Avenue between 11 o'clock p.m. and midnight. Can you explain that?" Miller's left hand moved to his collar again. "Sometimes calls don't get logged properly. Technology isn't perfect." "No, it isn't," Chen agreed. "But security cameras are quite reliable. The footage shows my client's car passing through a green light, not running a red as you testified. It also shows no police vehicle following him." The district attorney stood up again. "Your Honor, while this timing discrepancy is concerning, it doesn't negate the evidence found in the defendant's vehicle." Chen smiled slightly. "Actually, Your Honor, this is just the beginning. I have several witnesses from nearby businesses who saw something very different that night, and I believe these inconsistencies raise serious questions about all of Officer Miller's evidence." Judge Martinez leaned forward, her expression grave. "Continue, Ms. Chen." As Chen prepared to present her next piece of evidence, she noticed Officer Miller shifting uncomfortably in his seat. His carefully constructed story was beginning to crumble, and they all knew it. In the gallery, Lisa Thompson was already texting her journalism professor, knowing she had stumbled onto something much bigger than her father's case. The truth was finally starting to emerge, piece by damning piece. Lisa Thompson had never imagined her investigative journalism class project would turn into a real investigation. But here she was, sitting in her car outside Mike's auto shop, just 2 blocks from where her father had been arrested. Her professor had taught her to follow every lead, no matter how small. The auto shop's owner, Mike Rodriguez, was closing up for the day when Lisa approached. "Excuse me, Mr. Rodriguez? I'm Lisa Thompson. I'm investigating what happened on March 15th, the night my father was arrested right near here." Mike's expression changed at the mention of that night. "Your father?" The teacher. He glanced around the empty street before continuing. "Come inside. There's something you should know." Inside the shop's office, Mike pulled out his phone. "I was working late that night, had a customer's brake job that needed finishing. I heard the sirens and looked out." He scrolled through his phone. "I always take pictures when I see police activity. Better safe than sorry these days." The timestamps on Mike's photos showed 11:52 p.m. They clearly showed Thompson's silver Camry being pulled over, not at 11:30 as Officer Miller had claimed, but something else caught Lisa's attention. "Wait," she said, zooming in on one photo. "That shows 2 police cars, but Officer Miller testified he was alone." Mike nodded grimly. "That second officer left before they put your father in the car. Never mentioned in any reports, was he?" Lisa's hands shook as she forwarded the photos to her email. Her next stop was the 24-hour diner across the street from where her father was arrested. Rose Martinez had been working the night shift at Clara's diner for 12 years. Nothing much surprised her anymore, but she remembered that night clearly. "Sugar, I saw the whole thing from the window," Rose said, refilling Lisa's coffee cup. "That officer, the one who testified, he wasn't alone. There was another cop, kept looking around like he was nervous. They talked for a while before your daddy's car even showed up." Lisa's journalism instincts were screaming. "They were waiting there before my father drove by." "Sure were, parked in our lot for almost an hour. I thought it was strange, them just sitting there." Back in her car, Lisa called Sarah Chen. The defense attorney listened intently as Lisa shared what she'd discovered. "Lisa, this is excellent work," Chen said. "But we need more. Any other witnesses?" "I'm heading to the gas station now. The night attendant who was working then still has shifts there." Jamal Washington was restocking cigarettes when Lisa walked into the gas station. When she explained why she was there, his eyes widened. "Girl, I've been feeling guilty about that night for months," he said. "I saw them plant something in that car." Lisa's heart stopped. "What?" "While the main officer had your dad handcuffed by his car, the second one went around to the driver's side. He was quick, but I saw him reach under the seat. Next thing I know, they're pulling out bags of stuff that definitely wasn't there before." "How can you be sure?" Jamal pointed to the ceiling. "We got cameras everywhere. Boss keeps backup footage for 3 months." Within an hour, Lisa had a copy of the gas station's security video. The angle wasn't perfect, but it clearly showed a second officer reaching into her father's car while Officer Miller kept Thompson distracted. Late that night, Lisa met with Chen in her office, spreading out everything she'd gathered. Mike's photos showing 2 police cars, Rose's written statement about the officers waiting before her father arrived, and most damaging of all, gas station footage. "This is incredible, Lisa," Chen said, reviewing the evidence. "This completely contradicts Miller's testimony. He said he was alone, made a random traffic stop, and found drugs in plain view. But these witnesses and this footage tell a different story." "They set my father up," Lisa said, her voice shaking with anger. "But why?" Chen was already dialing her phone. "I think I know someone who might be able to answer that. An officer who worked with Miller. He's been wanting to come forward." As Lisa drove home that night, her mind raced. Her father had spent 3 months in jail, lost his job, and had his reputation ruined. All because of a corrupt cop's lies. But now, finally, the truth was coming out. What she didn't know yet was that her investigation was about to uncover something much bigger than one falsified arrest. Officer Miller's web of lies was about to unravel completely, and the implications would shake the entire police department to its core. Officer David Rodriguez sat in his parked car 3 blocks from the police station, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. In the passenger seat was a small USB drive that could destroy careers and change lives. After 15 years on the force, he was about to break the blue wall of silence. Chen arrived 5 minutes late, parking her car next to his. Rodriguez had insisted on meeting away from any security cameras. As she slid into his car, he spoke without looking at her. "What I'm about to give you, it could end my career. Maybe worse." He picked up the USB drive. It's Miller's original bodycam footage from that night, the one that supposedly got corrupted. Chen's heart raced as she took the drive. "How did you get this?" "I work in technical services. Miller asked me to lose it. Said it was for a good cause." Rodriguez's voice was bitter. "I made a copy first, been eating at me ever since." Back in her office, Chen plugged in the drive with trembling hands. The footage started at 11:15 p.m. on the night of Thompson's arrest. Miller was in his car with another officer, Detective Scott Wilson from Narcotics. "Everything set?" Wilson's voice was clear in the recording. "Yeah, Thompson always drives this road home from his evening tutoring sessions, like clockwork." Chen leaned closer to her screen. They had been planning this. The footage continued, showing the officers waiting. At 11:47 p.m., Thompson's Camry appeared. The traffic stop that followed was nothing like Miller had testified. The video showed Thompson being compliant, confused. There was no nervous behavior, no consent to search. While Miller kept Thompson distracted with aggressive questioning, Wilson clearly slipped something under the driver's seat. "Miss Chen?" Her office door opened, and Lisa Thompson walked in. "Any progress?" Chen paused the video. "Lisa, we have it. All of it. The bodycam footage shows everything." They watched together as the scene unfolded. When they reached the part where Wilson planted the evidence, Lisa had to turn away. "But why?" Lisa's voice cracked. "Why target my father?" Chen was already pulling up Thompson's old case files. "Your father testified as an expert witness in a case last year, didn't he? A civil suit against the department." "Yes," Lisa remembered. "A student's family sued after their son was wrongly arrested. Dad testified about the boy's character, proved he couldn't have done what they claimed. The department lost that case. It cost them millions, and 3 officers were fired." Chen's eyes narrowed, including Wilson's partner. The office phone rang, making them both jump. It was Rodriguez. "Chen, there's more," he said urgently. "I've been digging. Thompson wasn't the first. Miller and Wilson have done this 7 times in the past year. Always the same pattern, targeting people who cause problems for the department." Chen put the phone on speaker. "We need you to testify." There was a long pause. "I can't. But I sent you something else. Check your email." The email contained internal communications between Miller and Wilson, discussing their targets, planning their setups. They had created a systematic way to punish anyone who challenged police authority. "This is bigger than we thought," Chen said after hanging up. "Much bigger." Lisa was already typing on her laptop. "The other victims, I can find them. Interview them. Build a pattern." "No," Chen said firmly. "This is too dangerous. Miller and Wilson have powerful friends. Let me handle it through proper channels." But Lisa wasn't listening. She was looking at her phone, her face pale. "Ms. Chen, someone just sent me this." It was a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging. Your father isn't safe in county jail." Chen immediately called the jail, using her authorization as Thompson's attorney. After several tense minutes, she confirmed he was okay, for now. "We need to move fast," Chen said, gathering the evidence. "Tomorrow morning, I'm presenting this to Judge Martinez. All of it. But first, we need to get your father moved to protective custody." As they rushed out of the office, neither woman noticed the dark sedan parked across the street, or the man inside speaking quietly into a phone. "They have the footage. All of it. What do you want me to do?" The next day would bring everything to light, but the night wasn't over yet. And somewhere in the city, Officer Miller was about to learn that his carefully constructed world of lies was about to come crashing down. The courtroom was packed the next morning. Word had spread about possible new evidence, drawing reporters and fellow officers alike. Officer Miller sat at the prosecution table, outwardly calm, but his jaw tightly clenched. Judge Martinez called the court to order. "Ms. Chen, you indicated you have new evidence to present." Chen stood, clutching the USB drive that had arrived so mysteriously the night before. "Yes, Your Honor. We have obtained Officer Miller's original bodycam footage from the night in question." Miller's face went white. District Attorney Parker jumped to his feet. Objection. That footage was corrupted and declared unusable. Actually, Chen replied, it appears the corruption was intentional. We have both the footage and evidence of its deliberate manipulation. Judge Martinez's eyes narrowed. Proceed, Ms. Chen. The courtroom lights dimmed as the footage began playing on the large screen. The audience watched in stunned silence as Miller and Wilson's conversation revealed their premeditated plan. When the video showed Wilson planting evidence, gasps echoed through the room. Officer Miller. Chen approached the witness stand. Would you like to explain why your previous testimony differs so dramatically from this footage? Miller's left hand went to his collar. I invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Interesting choice, Chen continued. Perhaps you'd like to explain these internal emails instead. She projected the correspondence Rodriguez had provided. They show a pattern of targeting citizens who testified against the department. The district attorney stood again. Your Honor, we need time to verify the authenticity of this evidence. That won't be necessary, a voice called from the back of the courtroom. Officer Rodriguez walked down the center aisle. I can authenticate everything. I'm the one who saved the original footage when Officer Miller asked me to destroy it. Miller's composure finally broke. You're lying. Wilson and I never. He stopped abruptly, realizing his mistake. Wilson? Chen pounced. Your previous testimony stated you were alone that night. How would Detective Wilson be involved? The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Martinez banged her gavel. Order. Mr. Parker, what is the prosecution's position on this new evidence? The district attorney looked defeated. Your Honor, in light of these revelations, the state moves to dismiss all charges against Mr. Thompson. Not so fast, Chen interrupted. We're filing a civil rights lawsuit. Mr. Thompson spent 3 months in jail, lost his teaching position, and had his reputation destroyed. And he's not the only victim. She projected a series of photos onto the screen. 7 other individuals who had been arrested by Miller and Wilson under suspicious circumstances. All had prior connections to cases against the department. This wasn't just one bad arrest, Chen declared. This was a systematic campaign of revenge against anyone who challenged police misconduct. Miller stood suddenly. Everything we did was to protect the department. These people were threatening the integrity of. Officer Miller. Judge Martinez's voice cut like steel. I strongly advise you to stop talking and contact an attorney immediately. 2 court officers moved to flank Miller as Judge Martinez continued. Officer Miller is remanded into custody pending charges of perjury, evidence tampering, and civil rights violations. Mr. Thompson, you are free to go. This court will recommend a full review of all cases involving officers Miller and Wilson. As Miller was led away in handcuffs, Lisa Thompson hugged her father, who had just been brought in from holding. Tears streamed down both their faces. I'm so proud of you, baby girl, Thompson whispered to his daughter. You never gave up. Chen watched the reunion with satisfaction, but her work wasn't done. Rodriguez approached her quietly. There's more, he said softly. Higher-ups knew about this. They approved it. I know, Chen replied. And we're going to prove it. This isn't over. From her bench, Judge Martinez observed the scene, her professional demeanor masking her inner turmoil. She had trusted Miller, believed his testimony in countless cases. Now she would have to review every one of them, knowing that each might contain similar corrupted evidence. As the courtroom slowly emptied, the implications of the morning's events began to ripple outward. But no one yet realized just how far those ripples would reach, or how many more secrets were about to come to light in the days ahead. District Attorney William Parker sat in his dimly lit office, staring at the growing pile of case files on his desk. Each folder represented a case where Officer Miller or Detective Wilson had provided key testimony. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since morning. Reporters wanted statements. Defense attorneys demanded reviews of old convictions. The police chief was pressuring him to contain the damage. But as he reviewed the evidence Chen had presented, Parker knew there would be no containing this. Sir? His assistant poked her head in. The internal affairs investigators are here. 2 VIA officers entered, carrying boxes of their own files. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, no relation to the judge, placed a thick folder on Parker's desk. We found 23 more cases, she said grimly. All following the same pattern. People who testified against the department or filed complaints suddenly found themselves arrested on drug charges. Miller and Wilson were involved in every single one. Parker removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. How did we miss this? Because they were careful, used proper procedures, filed perfect paperwork. Everything looked legitimate on the surface. Lieutenant Martinez paused. Until now. Across town, in the county jail, Officer Miller sat in an isolation cell. His blue uniform had been replaced by orange prison clothes. His attorney had just left after delivering bad news. Detective Wilson had agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for a lighter sentence. Meanwhile, Marcus Thompson stood in front of his classroom for the first time in 3 months. The school board had reinstated him with full back pay and a public apology. His students burst into applause as he entered. Before we return to our regular lessons, Thompson said, his voice steady despite his emotions, I want to talk about justice. About how it can fail, but also how it can prevail when people refuse to give up. In the back of the classroom, Lisa Thompson quietly filmed her father's return. Her story about the investigation had already been picked up by national news outlets. Her professor had helped her connect with major newspapers interested in publishing a more detailed exposé. Sarah Chen was in Judge Martinez's chambers, along with representatives from the Public Defender's Office and the State Attorney General's Office. We've identified 57 people currently incarcerated based on Miller and Wilson's testimony, Chen explained. They'd all need immediate review, and that's just the start. Judge Martinez nodded gravely. I'm establishing a special task force. Every case they touched over the past 5 years will be re-examined. Every single one. The State Attorney General's representative cleared his throat. There's another issue. We found evidence suggesting departmental leadership was aware of these activities, possibly even authorized them. How high up does this go? Chen asked. We're still investigating, but at least to the deputy chief level, maybe higher. Back at the police station, Officer Rodriguez sat with internal affairs investigators, sharing everything he knew. Years of witness misconduct, covered-up complaints, and systematic retaliation against citizens who spoke up. They called it maintaining order, he explained. Anyone who challenged police authority became a target. Miller and Wilson were just the enforcement arm. The orders came from above. The police chief held an emergency press conference that afternoon. Facing a wall of cameras, he announced the suspension of 4 senior officers pending investigation, but insisted these were isolated incidents. Nobody believed him. By evening, protest crowds had gathered outside police headquarters. Many carried signs with Thompson's photo, now a symbol of systemic abuse and the fight for justice. Others held pictures of the other victims identified in Chen's investigation. In her office, Chen received an anonymous email containing internal police department memos. They revealed the coordinated program to intimidate citizens who filed complaints or testified against officers. As she read through them, her phone rang. It was Lisa Thompson. They found more body cam footage, Lisa said excitedly. Other officers saved copies, just like Rodriguez did. They're coming forward now. Chen smiled grimly. The wall of silence is cracking. Keep your father safe. This is going to get bigger before it's over. As night fell over the city, the implications of the day's events continued to spread. In his cell, Miller realized he would likely never wear a badge again. In their homes, other officers wrestled with their consciences, deciding whether to come forward. And in the hearts of countless wrongfully convicted citizens, hope began to bloom. The truth was finally emerging, and no amount of power or authority could stop it now. Judge Patricia Martinez sat alone in her chambers, reviewing the final report from the investigation task force. After 30 years on the bench, she thought she had seen everything. She was wrong. The evidence spread across her desk told a story of corruption that went beyond a few corrupt officers. Internal memos, emails, body cam footage, and testimony from whistleblowers revealed a decade-long pattern of systematic retaliation against citizens who challenged police authority. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Come in. Sarah Chen entered, carrying even more files. Judge, we've identified 112 cases that need immediate review, and there's something else you need to see. Chen placed a USB drive on the desk. More footage. This shows Deputy Chief Roberts explicitly ordering Miller and Wilson to handle people who filed complaints. He called it preventive maintenance. Judge Martinez felt her hands trembling as she reached for her reading glasses. She had known Roberts for 20 years, had dinner at his house, trusted his testimony countless times. Your Honor, Chen continued softly, many of these wrongful convictions happened in your courtroom. I know this is difficult. The judge stood abruptly, walking to her window. Below, she could see more protesters gathering outside the courthouse. Many carried signs with photos of the wrongfully convicted. Difficult. Martinez's voice cracked. I sent innocent people to prison, Miss Chen. I believed the lies. I was part of the system that failed them. She turned back to face Chen, tears streaming down her face. Call the State Attorney General's office. I want an emergency hearing. Today. And contact every defense attorney with affected cases. The courtroom was packed 3 hours later. News cameras lined the walls as Judge Martinez took her seat. Her usual stern expression was replaced by one of deep sorrow and determination. Before we begin the formal proceedings, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed room, I have something to say. She removed her glasses, looking directly at the gallery filled with former defendants and their families. For years, I believed I was serving justice in this courtroom. Today, I learned how wrong I was. This court was used as a weapon against the very citizens it was meant to protect. People lost their freedom, their families, their lives because of testimony I accepted without question. Martinez paused, composing herself. To every person wrongly convicted in this courtroom, I apologize. But apologies are not enough. Today, we begin making this right. She lifted a stack of papers. I am ordering the immediate review of all convictions involving the identified officers. Every person convicted based on their testimony will be released pending review. The court will appoint special masters to expedite these reviews. In the gallery, families began crying and hugging each other. Marcus Thompson held his daughter Lisa as she sobbed with relief. Furthermore, Martinez continued, her voice strengthening, I am ordering a special grand jury to investigate every level of the police department involved in this corruption. No one is above the law, not officers, not supervisors, not chiefs. The State Attorney General stood. Your Honor, in light of these events, my office is establishing a special prosecution task force. We will pursue charges against everyone involved in this conspiracy, regardless of rank or position. Judge Martinez nodded. Ms. Chen, you have motions to present. Chen approached the bench with a thick stack of documents. Yes, Your Honor. I have 112 motions to vacate convictions, with more being prepared. Granted, Martinez said without hesitation. Every single one. Process them immediately. As Chen began reading the names of people to be released, sobs and cheers filled the courtroom. Families who had lost years with their loved ones finally saw hope for reunion. Judge Martinez watched it all, tears flowing freely now. Each name represented a life destroyed by corruption, a family torn apart, a justice system that had failed its most basic duty. This court is in recess, she finally announced. But our work is just beginning. We will not rest until every victim of this corruption receives justice. As people filed out of the courtroom, many stopped to hug or thank the judge. She accepted each gesture with humility, knowing that no amount of action now could fully repair the damage done. Outside, the sun was setting over the city, but inside the justice system, a new day was dawning. The truth had finally broken through, and with it came the chance for real change. 6 months after Judge Martinez's historic ruling, the city's landscape of justice had changed dramatically. The morning sun shone through the windows of the newly established Police Oversight Committee office, where Lisa Thompson sat reviewing final drafts of reform policies. After her investigative work exposed the corruption scandal, Lisa had been hired as the committee's lead investigator. Her wall displayed framed newspaper headlines chronicling the aftermath. Police chief and deputies indicted. 112 wrongful convictions overturned. Congress passes Thompson Act for police accountability. Her father, Marcus Thompson, had returned to teaching full-time, but also traveled nationwide speaking about police reform and accountability. His story had become a catalyst for change in departments across the country. In the county jail, Officer Miller and Detective Wilson occupied cells in the same block where they had sent so many innocent people. Miller had received 20 years for his crimes, while Wilson's cooperation earned him a reduced sentence of 8 years. Deputy Chief Roberts and 3 other senior officers faced even longer sentences for orchestrating the corruption scheme. Sarah Chen's law office had expanded, now specializing in police misconduct cases. On this morning, she was meeting with the last group of wrongfully convicted individuals being released. The settlement checks have been processed, she explained to the group. But more importantly, your records have been fully expunged. You can start fresh. One man raised his hand. What about the officers who did this to us? Will they ever get out? Not for a long time, Chen assured them, and they'll never work in law enforcement again. The Thompson Act made sure of that. Across town, Judge Martinez presided over a different kind of hearing. The city had established a Truth and Reconciliation Commission where officers could admit to past misconduct in exchange for immunity, but only if they helped identify other cases of abuse. Officer Rodriguez, whose initial whistleblowing had helped break the case, testified about the culture that had enabled the corruption. We were taught that protecting the department was more important than protecting the truth, he explained. That had to change. And change it had. The police department now operated under new leadership and strict oversight. Every officer wore body cameras that couldn't be turned off or tampered with. Civilian complaints were investigated by an independent board. Officers who reported misconduct were protected, not punished. In her chambers after the hearing, Judge Martinez reviewed a progress report. Of the 112 overturned convictions, 108 had been formally dismissed. The other 4 had been retried with legitimate evidence, resulting in 2 acquittals and 2 guilty pleas. More importantly, not a single case of retaliatory arrest had been reported since the reforms began. Lisa Thompson knocked on the judge's door. Judge Martinez, we finished the final draft of the oversight guidelines. Would you like to review them? The judge smiled, remembering the young journalism student who had first uncovered the scandal. Come in, Lisa. And it's Patricia now, you've earned it. As they reviewed the documents together, Lisa's phone buzzed with news alerts. Similar investigations had begun in other cities, inspired by what had happened here. The ripples of change continued to spread. That evening, the Thompsons hosted a barbecue for families of the exonerated. Their backyard was filled with people who had lost years to corruption but were now rebuilding their lives. Children played while parents shared stories of recovery and renewal. Sarah Chen arrived late, carrying new files. Sorry, but I thought you'd want to see this. 3 more officers came forward today. We might have another 30 cases to review. Marcus Thompson shook his head. More families to help heal. More truth to uncover, Lisa added. As the sun set, conversation turned to the future. Some of the exonerated had started a support group for others going through similar ordeals. Others were working with Lisa's oversight committee, ensuring that such abuse could never happen again. Judge Martinez, who had stopped by briefly, raised her glass in a toast. To truth, to justice, and to the brave people who fight for both. The gathering represented something powerful, not just the end of corruption, but the beginning of healing. The system had been broken, but people like Lisa, Chen, Rodriguez, and Martinez had helped rebuild it, stronger and more just than before. As stars appeared in the evening sky, the chatter and laughter in the Thompson backyard carried a message of hope. The truth had not only set people free, it had transformed an entire city's understanding of justice. And that truth would continue to shine, lighting the way forward for others to follow.